My name is Margaret Collins, I'm 52 years old, and for more than 2 decades, I served tea inside Buckingham Palace. Among fine porcelain, silver trays, and halls full of protocols, I believed I was living a common routine, invisible, almost automatic. One face among many others in the historic corridors, a silent witness to decisions that changed nations. If you saw me walking through the palace with my impeccably starched uniform, you would think, she's just another staff member. I thought so too. Every morning, I would wake up at 5 a.m., take the crowded tube, and enter through the back door of that symbol of British monarchy. My job was simple: ensure the cups were always full, the trays always polished, and that no one noticed my presence. But on a winter night, a sentence I heard from the Queen's lips changed everything I believed about faith, about tradition, and even about who I was. A single sentence. Words whispered between servings of tea that shook the foundations of my existence. Words I shouldn't have heard, but that, for some divine reason, were planted in my ears that December night. From that moment on, I was never the same again. What I'm about to tell you might sound like fiction. Perhaps you'll doubt it. I myself doubted it for months, but I promise that every word is true as the aroma of Earl Grey I served to the Queen on that fateful night. Before continuing with my story, write in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this account of mine is reaching. It's strange to think that I, a simple tea server, am sharing something so intimate with people I'll never meet. People from different cultures, religions, and experiences. But perhaps that's the power of true stories. They connect souls that would never meet otherwise. I see the numbers growing, notifications appearing. Each comment is like a small light on the world map. London, Malaysia, Cairo, Indonesia. Thinking that my story is traveling so far moves me deeply. Thank you for that. Now, let me go back to the beginning. To understand how I arrived at the palace, you need to know where I came from. I come from a simple family in the English countryside. I was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, Shakespeare's town, but our story was far from poetic. My father worked at the local cement factory, returning home with his face and hands always covered in white dust. My mother sewed to supplement the family income. I grew up hearing that hard work was the only form of survival. Keep your head down, do your work well, and never talk back to your superiors. That was my mother's mantra, a simple philosophy for simple people. Our house had only 2 bedrooms, which I shared with my 2 sisters. Hot water was a weekend luxury. And yet, we were considered lower middle class. There were many with much less. I finished basic school and went to work in local hotels as a chambermaid. I cleaned rooms, changed sheets, tidied bathrooms. An honest job, but with no future. Until one of the guests, an elegant lady who I later discovered was a human resources assistant from the palace, commented on my attention to detail. "You would be perfect for working at Buckingham," she said, while inspecting the room I had just cleaned. "We're looking for discreet and efficient people." 3 weeks later, I was on my first day of training as a royal tea server. I remember my mother, with tears in her eyes, hugging me before I left for London. She adjusted my new uniform and said, "You'll serve tea, but you'll also be serving history." I never imagined that, between cups and teapots, I would hear conversations that no one would believe if revealed. That with each sip of Earl Grey or Darjeeling, I would be witnessing moments that would never reach history books. The training was rigorous. 3 months learning the art of serving without being seen. I learned how to hold the tray correctly, how to pour tea without making noise, how to walk silently through marble corridors. I learned what the preferences of each royal family member were. Some preferred milk before, others after. Some with sugar, others with honey, others plain. And above all, I learned the art of silence. Working at Buckingham was more than a job. It was living in constant silence. On the first day of work, the head butler, Mr. Winters, a man of severe appearance and impeccable posture, gathered us in the small preparation room. "You will have the privilege of witnessing history being made," he said, walking slowly among us, nervous novices. "You will see prime ministers, kings and queens, presidents and dictators. You will hear conversations that could start wars or bring peace. And what will you do with this knowledge?" He stopped, looking each of us in the eye. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You are extensions of the walls. Your ears do not hear, your eyes do not see. Understood?" We, the staff, learned to be present without being noticed. It was a delicate dance. Enter at the right moment, serve at the right temperature, leave without making noise. One wrong phrase could cost decades of career. I remember a young tea server who, accidentally, let slip to a local newspaper that the Queen preferred toast with apricot jam. An innocuous detail, almost trivial. The following week, she was transferred to the royal stables in Balmoral, Scotland. She never returned to the palace. Silence became my second skin. I learned to move like a shadow, to breathe without making noise, to exist without leaving traces. It was a valuable talent within those ancestral walls. For years, I carried small and large secrets with me. I heard heated discussions between royal family members that never reached the tabloids. I witnessed moments of human vulnerability from figures that the world considered almost divine. I saw the Queen, alone in a room, crying silently after the death of one of her beloved corgis, and I kept all this inside me. Silence was my duty, my honor. But that silence, one day, transformed into the prison that forced me to keep within me words that burned like fire. Words that, the more I tried to forget, the louder they echoed in my conscience. How do you keep to yourself something that can change lives? How do you silence a truth that wants to be shouted? This was my cross for months, until I could no longer bear it. It all began on a cold December night, a night that should have been like any other in my 20 years of service. It was December 15th, 2019. Snow was falling in thick flakes outside, covering the palace gardens with a perfect white blanket. Christmas lights already decorated the main corridors, but the Red Hall, used for private meetings, maintained its usual sobriety. I was called at exactly 8:14 p.m. The internal phone rang in the service area, and the voice of the principal assistant informed, "Margaret, tea for two in the Red Hall, Earl Grey for Her Majesty, mint tea for the guest." Before continuing, I wanted to mention that during this period I learned that Allah asks us to take care not only of faith, but also of the body He has entrusted to us. For this reason, I want to recommend something that might help, a practical guide on healthy living, which includes how to maintain discipline, energy, and balance. And as an additional gift, this material also brings a special guide on ruqya and spiritual protection to strengthen not only the body, but also the heart. So I continued and prepared everything with the usual care. The water at the exact temperature, the leaves precisely measured, the silver tray polished until it reflected the lights like a mirror, the butter biscuits made that afternoon, still slightly warm. As I walked through the corridors, I could hear the wind howling against the centuries-old windows. It was one of those days when even the palace, with its modern heating systems, seemed unable to completely ward off the cold. I knocked discreetly on the door and entered, after hearing the Queen's soft, "Come in." Snow was falling outside, creating a white curtain on the tall windows, and I was called to serve tea during a private meeting between Her Majesty and an Arab prince, Prince Hassan bin Talal of Jordan, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't unusual. The Queen frequently received foreign dignitaries in unofficial meetings, small conversations that preceded the big agreements, the big announcements. I entered silently, as I had been trained. The Queen was sitting in her favorite armchair, that red velvet one with dark wood details. The prince, a middle-aged man with a well-trimmed gray beard and intelligent eyes, sat across from her. Both interrupted their conversation when I entered. I served the Queen first, then the guest. I placed the biscuits on the center table. I asked, as protocol required, if they desired anything else. After the polite, "No, thank you," I began to withdraw. That's when the Queen requested, Margaret, bring more hot water, please. I believe we'll have a long conversation." "Certainly, Your Majesty," I replied, and left to fetch the extra teapot. When I returned 5 minutes later, the conversation had deepened. I was supposed to be just a shadow in the hall, enter, serve, leave. But as I added hot water to the teapots, something extraordinary happened. As I served the third cup, remaining as invisible as possible, I heard the Queen say something I never would have expected. "I've always admired the spiritual discipline of Islam, the prayers, the fasting, the charity. My heart raced so hard I feared they might hear it. My hands trembled slightly, and I had to make a conscious effort not to spill the tea." The head of the Anglican Church, the defender of the faith, as her official title proclaims, declaring admiration for another faith before a Muslim guest. That shook all my certainties. I was raised in a devout Anglican family. I attended church every Sunday during my childhood and adolescence. I was taught that our faith was the correct one, that other religions, especially Islam, were mistaken in their beliefs. And now, the very leader of our church was expressing admiration for what I had always been taught to view with suspicion. "It's impressive," continued the Queen, "how 5 times a day, no matter where they are or what they're doing, the faithful stop to connect with the divine. There is a purity in that, a devotion that sometimes I feel we've lost in our Western practices." She spoke with surprising sincerity, without the formality that usually accompanied her public statements. It was as if, at that moment, it wasn't the Queen speaking, but simply an elderly woman sharing honest reflections on spirituality. "In our circles," she continued, "religion has often become a matter of appearances, don't you think? Attending the right services, making the right donations, being seen with the right people. But where is the true connection with the divine?" The prince smiled kindly, nodding in understanding, and then he responded with words that would change my life forever. The prince responded with serenity, his eyes reflecting a calm wisdom. "Your Majesty touches on something profound. In truth, there are more connections between our traditions than many realize. Did you know that in the Quran, Jesus is mentioned more times than Prophet Muhammad himself? We call him Isa, son of Mary, born of a virgin, performer of miracles." I was paralyzed. The tray in my hands suddenly felt as heavy as lead. I, who had grown up hearing that Muslims rejected Christ, discovered that they deeply honored him. "Indeed," continued the prince, adjusting himself in his armchair, "in Islam, Jesus is considered one of the most important prophets. There is an entire chapter in the Quran dedicated to Mary, his mother. We believe in his miraculous birth, in his miracles, in his message of peace. The main difference is that we don't see him as divine, but as a perfect human messenger of God." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "It's curious how these nuances are lost in public discourse, isn't it? How we create divisions where there could be bridges?" "Exactly, Your Majesty," agreed the prince. "In times of such polarization, perhaps we need to remember what unites us, not what separates us. Jesus, or Isa as we call him, preached love, compassion, care for the poor and needy. Aren't these universal values that all true faiths share?" I tried to maintain my neutral expression, as the training required, but inside, my mind was racing. Everything I had been taught about Islam, that it was a violent religion, that it denied Jesus, that it was completely alien to Christianity, was being contradicted in that conversation. "In the Quran," continued the prince, "there is a passage that says, 'Say, we believe in God and what has been revealed to us, and what was revealed to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes, and what was given to Moses and Jesus, and what was given to the prophets from their Lord. We make no distinction between any of them, and to him we submit.'" The Queen smiled. "How beautiful, so inclusive, so respectful of all traditions." "It is the essence of our faith," replied the prince. "We respect all prophets who came before, recognizing that the essential message has always been the same. There is one God. We should worship him, be virtuous, and treat our neighbors well." As they continued talking, I remained motionless, as if any movement could break the spell of that moment. It was as if a curtain was being lifted, revealing a world that had always been there, but that I had never been able to see. I returned home that night unable to sleep. I lived in a small apartment in Battersea, about 40 minutes from the palace. Normally, this journey was my moment of decompression, of leaving behind the weight of royal formality. But that night, my mind was too far away to notice the streets, the people, the crowded tube. I sat on the edge of my bed, still dressed, looking at the wall without really seeing it. Questions surrounded me like a swarm. How could a tea server know something so big? Had I heard correctly? Or was it just imagination? What was the significance of all this for my own faith? I had been raised to believe that Anglicanism was the right path, that other religions, especially Islam, were mistaken. And now I discovered that much of what I had been taught about Muslims was, at the very least, incomplete. If they're wrong about this, I thought, what else might they be wrong about? I took my Bible from the bedside table. It was an old copy, with a worn leather cover that had belonged to my grandmother. I opened it to passages about Jesus, trying to reconnect them with what I knew, trying to anchor myself in something familiar. but the prince's words kept echoing in my mind. Jesus is mentioned more times than Prophet Muhammad himself. How could this be true? How could a religion that I had been taught to fear honor Jesus so much? I looked at the crucifix hanging on the wall of my room. It had been a gift from my mother when I moved to London. "To protect you," she said. But that night, for the first time, I questioned, what exactly was it protecting me from? Deep down, I knew. That phrase had planted within me a seed impossible to uproot, a seed of curiosity, of doubt, of searching, a seed that, without my knowing at that moment, was already beginning to sprout. I spent the night awake, alternating between reading the Bible, confused prayers, and long reflections. When the sun rose, I had made a decision. I needed to know more. I couldn't simply ignore what I had heard and return to my faith without questioning. If there was truth in those words, I needed to find it. And so, discreetly, I began my secret journey of discovery. Discreetly, I began to look for books and articles about Jesus in Islam. It wasn't easy. I feared being seen buying such books in local bookstores. London is small when you work for royalty, and rumors travel fast. So, I started with public libraries, discreetly, choosing branches far from my neighborhood. At Hammersmith Library, I found my first serious book on the subject, Jesus in Islam and Christianity, by a scholar who had studied both traditions. I read it hidden in my room, often under the covers with a flashlight, like a teenager with a forbidden romance. The revelations were astonishing. I discovered that Jesus was mentioned 93 times in the Quran, always with deep respect, that Muslims believed in his virgin birth, in his miracles, in his ascension to heaven, that there was even an entire chapter dedicated to Mary, Jesus' mother, the only woman mentioned by name in the Islamic holy book. The internet became my silent ally. In the early hours, when I couldn't sleep, I searched forums, academic articles, translations of the Quran. I learned about the different interpretations of Jesus' role in Islamic traditions. I learned that Muslims believed he would return at the end of times. Each discovery was like pulling a thread of wool. The more I pulled, the more my old faith unraveled. Not that I was abandoning Jesus. On the contrary, I was discovering new dimensions of his importance. But the rigid structures of my religious education were beginning to crumble. One day, I found the courage to enter a small Islamic bookstore near Regent's Park. My heart was racing. I felt like a spy, an intruder. The store owner, a gentleman with a white beard and gentle eyes, asked if I needed help. "I'm interested in learning about Jesus in Islam," I confessed, almost whispering. Instead of the surprised reaction I expected, he smiled warmly. "Ah, Isa, peace be upon him, one of our most beloved prophets." And then, to my surprise, he gifted me a small book. "This is a good start," he said. "And when you finish, come back. I'll have more for your journey." I left the store with the book hidden in my purse, but with a lighter heart. That unexpected kindness confirmed something I was beginning to realize. There was goodness and truth beyond the boundaries of my tradition. At night, in the comfort of my apartment, I opened the book. On the first page, there was a quotation from the Quran. He said, "I am indeed a servant of God. He has given me the book and made me a prophet. He has made me blessed wherever I am, and has enjoined on me prayer and charity as long as I live." These were words attributed to Jesus, speaking of himself in the cradle at the moment of his miraculous birth. The beauty of that passage moved me to tears. At that moment, I understood that my search was not just intellectual, it was spiritual. I wasn't just learning new facts about a different religion. I was rediscovering my own relationship with the divine. While I continued serving tea in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, I carried within me a silent war. Externally, nothing had changed. I still wore the same impeccable uniform, still followed the same rigorous protocol, still moved through the halls with the same discretion. But internally, a whirlwind was forming. Each Sunday morning, I still went to St. Mary's Church in Battersea, where I had attended services for years. I sat on the same bench, sang the same hymns, listened to the same sermons. But now, these familiar words sounded different to my ears. I prayed mechanically at Anglican masses, pronouncing words that had been comfortable throughout my life, but my heart was already seeking something different. When the vicar spoke about Jesus as the Son of God, part of a divine trinity, I couldn't help but remember the Arab prince's words about Jesus as a human prophet, loved and respected, but not divine. During communion, as I received the bread and wine, I thought about the simplicity of Islamic prayer. Just the believer and God, without intermediaries, without sacraments. There was a purity in that which attracted me. I had never questioned my faith before. I had accepted what I was taught since childhood, without questions, without doubts. Now, every aspect of my creed was under scrutiny. The hardest part was the isolation. I had no one to share these doubts with. My family would be horrified. My colleagues at the palace might report my strange behavior to superiors. My friends from church would certainly try to bring me back to the right path. So I kept everything inside me, increasing the internal pressure. One night, after a particularly difficult day at the palace, I had served tea during a meeting between royal family members and leaders of the Anglican Church. I returned home exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually. I sat on the small sofa in my apartment and cried. I cried for hours until there were no more tears. I was torn between two worlds, keeping the silence for fear of losing everything: my job, my family, my community, or accepting the truth that God was beginning to show me. "Why, God?" I asked aloud to the empty apartment. "Why did you plant this seed in me? Why didn't you leave me in comfortable ignorance? What should I do now?" That night, I dreamed of Jesus. Not the Jesus from Anglican stained glass, blonde and blue-eyed, but a man with brown skin and dark eyes, dressed as a simple peasant from the Middle East. He didn't say anything, just smiled and pointed to a path that I couldn't see clearly. I woke up with a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in months. I still didn't have all the answers, but I knew I needed to continue searching, that the truth, whatever it was worth the risk. That's when I began to think of the unthinkable, visiting a mosque, not to convert immediately, but to see with my own eyes, hear with my own ears, to know this faith that spoke of Jesus in a way that resonated so deeply with me. I researched discreetly. There were several mosques in London, of course, but I needed one where I could enter without drawing attention, where I could observe and learn without immediate commitment. I discovered that the Central London Mosque offered tours for non-Muslims and informative sessions about Islam. I scheduled a visit for my next day off, 2 weeks later. While I waited, I continued reading, researching, and most importantly, praying. Not the formal prayers I had memorized, but sincere conversations with God, asking for guidance, clarity, courage. The decision was not yet made, but the path was beginning to reveal itself, step by step. The following spring, after months of internal struggle, secret research, desperate prayers for clarity, I finally found courage. On a sunny April day, when tulips were beginning to color London's gardens, I discreetly entered a mosque in London. I chose the East London Mosque, smaller and less known than the central one. I wore simple clothes, loose pants, a long-sleeved blouse, a scarf covering my hair. My heart was beating so hard that I feared everyone could hear it. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not an empty silence, but one filled with an almost palpable serenity. The second thing was the geometric patterns on the walls and ceilings. No images of people or animals, just perfect mathematical designs that seemed to represent the divine order of the universe. A kind woman received me at the entrance. I explained, nervously, that I was interested in learning about Islam. She smiled, invited me to sit in a space reserved for visitors, and began to explain the basic principles of the faith. That's when I heard for the first time, in Arabic and then in English, the words that touched my soul. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. The simplicity of that declaration, known as the Shahada, the Islamic profession of faith, struck something deep inside me. I stayed there for hours, observing the prayers, asking questions, listening to explanations. The woman gave me an English Quran and invited me to come back whenever I wanted. In the following weeks, I returned several times. Each visit confirmed what my heart already knew. I had found a path that spoke to my soul as no other had done before. A path that deeply honored Jesus, but also offered a direct relationship with God, without intermediaries. A path of spiritual discipline, of charity, of submission to a will greater than my own. Finally, 3 months after my first visit, I made the decision. On a Friday afternoon, the Islamic sacred day, I returned to the mosque, this time not as a visitor, but as someone ready to take a definitive step. The imam, a man with a gray beard and kind eyes, listened to my story attentively. He showed no surprise when I mentioned my work at the palace. He just nodded with respect. When I finished speaking, he simply asked, "Are you ready?" I took a deep breath. I thought of everything I would leave behind: the ease of belonging to the dominant religion, the approval of my family, perhaps even my job. But I also thought of the peace I had found in these visits, the clarity I felt when reading the Quran, the direct connection with God that I experienced during prayers. "Yes," I answered, "I'm ready." With witnesses present, I pronounced the Shahada. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul Allah. I bear witness that there is no deity but God, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. In that instant, the invisible tea server ceased to be just a servant of royalty. I became a servant of a single king, the King of Kings, the creator of everything. The tears that ran down my face were not of sadness, but of relief, of peace, of recognition. It was like coming home after a long journey through strange lands. I didn't know what the future held, if I could keep my job, if my family would accept, if I would find a new community, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had found the truth that my heart had been seeking since that winter night at the palace, and that certainty was enough. Today, 5 years after that transformative spring, my life has changed in ways I could never have imagined. Yes, there were losses. My family initially reacted with shock and disapproval. Some friends distanced themselves. At the palace, when I discreetly requested accommodations for my 5 daily prayers, I was transferred to a less visible department, no longer serving tea directly to the royal family, but working in food preparation for larger events. But there were infinitely more valuable gains. I found a welcoming community at the mosque, sisters and brothers who supported me in every step of the journey. I learned enough Arabic to recite the Quran in its original language. I discovered an inner peace that I had never known before. And as for the Queen, I never had a private conversation with her again, of course. But once, during an event at the palace where I was helping in the kitchen, our gazes briefly crossed. She recognized me, I'm sure. And in that brief moment, there seemed to be a silent understanding between us, as if she knew somehow the role she had played in my journey. I regret nothing. Each step, each tear, each moment of doubt was worth it to get where I am today. I share this story not to convince anyone to follow the same path I followed. Each spiritual journey is deeply personal, and God guides us in different ways. I share it because I believe we need to be open to truths that can emerge in the most unexpected places. Because sometimes genuine faith requires courage to question, to search, to follow the heart even when the path seems frightening. If this story touched your heart, share this video in groups and social media. We never know who might need to hear that God can reveal himself in the most unexpected places, even during a simple cup of tea at Buckingham Palace. Perhaps you too are on a spiritual journey right now. Perhaps you're questioning truths you've always accepted. Perhaps you're feeling that restlessness that precedes great changes. If that's the case, I want you to know you're not alone. And it's worth following the truth, no matter where it leads you. As a beautiful verse in the Quran says, "As for those who strive in our cause, we will surely guide them to our paths." May God bless your journey as he blessed mine.